Good afternoon and welcome to the Watchman Report telecast. We broadcast to the world for Yeshua HaMashiach. My name is Alan Singler and my co-host is Gwen Fallow. We are your watchmen and watchwoman on the wall. We call Jesus Christ by his Hebrew name, Yeshua HaMashiach. Our special guest is our friend and fellow Christian, Seth Morgan. Seth has written a fascinating book entitled, It's All About Liberty, Stupid. But first, we want to briefly cover some end-time news. Gwen?
There are only 31 days until the first blood moon of the Tetrad, beginning on the 15th of April 2014, or 15 Nisan. Is that Nisan? How do you say that, Al?
You're fine.
5774. There is a lot going on in the Middle East. Obama is going to directly enter the so-called peace talks between Israel and the Palestinian authorities. Obama wants the peace agreement signed sometime in late April. Keep your eyes on God's centerpiece, Jerusalem. We have the Pope visiting Israel in late May, probably to take Roman Catholic properties from Israel. This is sad, but some Jews are selling out Israel to the Roman Catholic Church and others. The European boycott is affecting Israel's huge export business, and some Jewish businessmen want to give up Israel's land in order to restore their business relationship with Europe. Remember, the RCC believes the church has replacement theology, the Jews in God's eyes. Damascus, Syria, Egypt, and Iran have not gone away. The 50-year Jewish Jubilee is in 2017. The Shemitah, with its consequent harbinger for the U.S., is in 2015. I wonder what harbinger God will send this time. On top of that, if you think this frigid winter is normal, it is not. Our bad weather is linked to our policy of giving away God's covenant land of Israel. Pastor Mark Blitz made this amazing discovery in 2008. Blitz had been studying prophecies and focusing on the sun and the moon. These prophecies are God's signal to his chosen people and Christians, like 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. The Hebrew word implies it's a signal for coming or his appearing. Pastor Blitz is correct. These signals are divine appointments. A series of 4 blood moons is a warning to the nation of Israel, while there will be 2 other solar eclipses in between, which is a warning to the other nations. Back to you, Al.
In reference to Malaysian airliner MH370, 2 aspects have not been reported regarding this mystery. Number 1, using today's electronic weaponry, a plane can seemingly vanish. And number 2, the passengers aboard the missing Malaysia jet are linked to contacts in the U.S. Defense Department and the high-tech electronic weaponry industry. Today's electronic warfare capability includes weaponry that can hide planes. Electronic weaponry is not only available, it is being deployed. Is this being used to hide or cloak the vanished plane? Perhaps we'll find out in a few weeks. New electronic weapons allow for jamming, blinding, deafening, and more, so that a plane could possibly vanish from radar detection and security systems would not have been activated. Basic radar, electric countermeasure strategies are used in electronic warfare and include radar interference, target modifications, and changing the electrical properties of the air. For example, a U.S. intelligence assessment concluded any Israeli attack on Iran would go far beyond fighter planes and airstrikes and would likely deploy electronic warfare against Iran's electric grid. In fact, the Israelis have done this before with Stuxnet computer viruses. And they also would hit internet, cell phone networks, and emergency frequencies for firemen and police officers. The Israelis also have jammers capable of creating interference with Iran's emergency frequencies for first responders. In a 2007 attack, the Syrian military got a taste of this when Israeli planes spoofed the country's air defense radars, at first making it appear that no Israeli jets were in the sky, and then in an instant making the radar believe that hundreds of Israeli jets were in the air. Last year it was announced that new stealth technology makes airplanes invisible not only to radar, it also renders them hidden to the human eye as well. And we will have several PowerPoint slides in the program that will show you the applications of holograms in this technology. Last year it was announced that the new stealth technology makes planes invisible not only to radar, but it renders them invisible to the human eye as well, just like an invisibility cloak in the Hollywood sci-fi thriller or in the old Star Trek TV series. China had just touted its work on a cloaking technology using a hexagonal arrays of glass-like panels to bend light around an object, obscuring it from view as though hidden by an invisibility cloak. Experts confirmed that the technology was legitimate and not unlike American and European projects from past years. In fact, the Chinese have gone so far in this technology that across a body of water, they have made cities appear that were really not there. And there's a PowerPoint slide of a group of Chinese people, hundreds of them, looking at this object that has been created by a hologram. So this is one aspect about this mystery that hasn't been talked about, and the fact that on board this plane were 20 experts who work in this field. So it's very interesting that 20 experts in this field of electronic weaponry were on board this aircraft that has seemingly disappeared. Our guest today, Seth Morgan, is going to read some interesting facts about a hero of the program, Seth Morgan's hero, James Madison. Madison's birthday was yesterday, and here are some facts.
Well, great, thanks Al. Madison apparently was introduced to his wife Dolly by Aaron Burr. Yes, the founding father was connected to Aaron Burr. Matter of fact, Madison and his wife Dolly were 17 years apart in age, which these are all things I was not familiar with Madison about. Those are interesting to say the least, Al, so I appreciate you bringing them up. Madison and Aaron Burr were actually classmates and were in rival debating societies at Princeton. Aaron Burr apparently knew a few things about rival activities. Madison graduated in 1771, and his roommate was poet Philip Freneau. Madison didn't fight in the Revolutionary War. He was small in stature. Matter of fact, apparently he was about 5'3", and weighed a lot less than Al or I do, for sure. Madison was really the father of the Constitution. He arrived 11 days early for the event, presented his Virginia plan of checks and balances as the foundation of the Constitution. And then he worked tirelessly to get the Constitution ratified. Madison was known for writing many of the Federalist Papers, of which we would all be very wise to read. Madison wasn't keen on writing the Bill of Rights at first, as he feared that actually linking individual rights in the Constitution would possibly limit other unlisted rights. He had a change of heart when it became apparent that a Bill of Rights was needed to get the Constitution ratified. During the first Congress, Madison presented the first draft of the bill, which he had written, and it had 9 articles with 20 amendments. Madison retired for about 4 years at the height of his political power. He had been in the House for 8 years. And Madison walked away from national politics in March 1797 to return to his estate. Madison, along with his mentor Thomas Jefferson, had formed an opposition party to the Federalists, and Madison wrote the controversial Virginia Resolution. Madison, his likeness did appear on some U.S. currency and the very rare $5,000 bill. And we really, in less important news, don't know what Madison liked to eat, but apparently some historians believe that he had a penchant for Virginia ham. Madison was a man of few hobbies, as many men are who are great men in history, very focused on his work, but he enjoyed playing chess and reading Latin and Greek in their original languages.
By the way, Seth, if you have one of those $5,000 bills, it's worth about $100,000.
Fantastic.
Well, if not more.
I'll put them in the safe when I get home.
And Gwen, could you give our contact information before we begin with Seth?
Sure. You can reach Al at, do you have it there?
Yep.
The Watchman Report, and you can email him at singerallen@yahoo.com, or you can call him at 513-279-8350.
Very good. Well, this man is, Seth has written a fascinating book. It's about Liberty Stupid. And this should be on the mantle or on in your collection of books at home. Every American should have a copy of this, whether you're a Libertarian, a Democrat, a Republican, or Tea Party, whatever. This book is essential reading. It's a quick read. It's only 100 and something pages. You can quickly read it in probably an afternoon. And so I highly recommend it, and we're going to discuss this book now. Go ahead, Gwen.
Well, my first question is, why would you choose a title like that? Wouldn't that be pretty offensive?
Well,
or you have your boxing gloves
no,
on?
we actually have, we've gotten a few comments, Gwen, of why did you put stupid in the title? I graduated from a homeschool environment, and I like to joke, our children are schooled at home right now as well, that some homeschool moms have come to me and said, I don't like the word stupid, you're offending people. It's actually a play off words for those who remember Bill Clinton, how can you forget him? And James Carville, who was one of his chief advisors, coined the phrase in one of his elections, it's the economy stupid. And it really kind of served as the clarion call for that campaign, and everything got wrapped around the question of the economy. They basically wouldn't engage on an issue without tying it back to the economy, as they believed that in that time the economic issues were paramount of the day. And it was our way of expressing that we believe liberty always has been, at least in America, and should remain the central issue that we debate today as we think about the policies and the form of government that we wish to put over us. And so that's why we use the phrase, it's about liberty stupid. I'm proud of the title, and it depends on who you talk to. Some think it's really catchy, and others get a little, their hair rises on their back.
Well, I think it's a good idea to get people's attention. Don't you, Al?
I do too. I thought the book begins with a very important quote from C.L. Bryant. When the purpose of anything is forgotten, abuse is inevitable. And I think we've forgotten about our liberties.
Yeah, C.L.'s been a friend for some time. C.L. Bryant's a African-American pastor, actually, and has done a lot in the area of liberty. He used to be the president of a NAACP chapter, I believe, in Texas. And through those experiences, I think really came to the conclusion that liberty was being abused, and we're happy that he wrote the foreword. We have forgotten, though, as C.L. said, the question of liberty in our society today. We've forgotten it where it came from, and we are abusing it to our own benefit. And this isn't the question that the natural libertarians, but either big L or small L, as we call them, libertarians have, of the policy on certain social issues of freedom. It's a question of a framework, Al and Gwen, about how we maintain what we have and what we were granted through our Constitution, and frankly, I believe by God Almighty himself.
So who do you think is actually the people or the people group that's suffering the most from being stupid?
Well, that's a great question. I think that's a loaded question. How do I answer that? I think who is in many ways abusing it the most or suffering the most,
Yes.
you could kind of view it the same way,
Right.
are frankly conservatives.
Okay.
And I get in trouble with some conservatives when I say that. So
Okay.
in many respects, they're the people who have, and the reason I say this, they're the people who have stated their desire to maintain liberty. I think many on the more liberal spectrum, I'm not saying they want to give up their liberty, but they view civil government often as an answer to the cure. Conservatives are the ones who say that they believe that government should be limited in its power.
Right.
But in many respects, if you look at the national conservative conversation, the conversation of liberty is very missing in the conversation. Instead, we spend a lot of time focusing on individual policies and those merits or demerits of those policies, instead of saying the central question that we should be asking is, what does this do to advance or restrict liberty, and then start to talk about the policy impact. And I know that may sound simplistic or small, but as you start to unpack that, it has extreme ramifications on how we think about public policy in America.
So why do you think conservatives are missing this point?
Well, I think
what has led them kind of astray?
Well, I think it's a lot easier to debate, pit policy versus policy than it is to talk about framework, to talk about foundation, to talk about what got us to this point. So it's easier for Mitt Romney to debate Barack Obama on how many jobs the two of them plan to create than for Mitt Romney to make the debate that government, civil government, isn't the creator of jobs, although he had said that, and instead call America back to its rightful place as individuals and families and churches. And so I think the Republican Party, I say it's easier, but the Republican Party continues to lose elections. They continue to lose the attention of the youth that are coming in and to voting age as well. And I think in many respects it's because they've lost the central theme of the message that they had started with in the first place.
And it's rather an abstract argument, too.
It is abstract, yes.
So
they've lost the framework. That's what you're saying.
I think many Americans have lost the framework. We tend to think of liberty as it relates only to us, instead of thinking of it as a framework that must be maintained for all. I'm sure you and I wouldn't agree on certain things, Gwen, and should it be that my view of it gets implied on you or your view gets implied on me? And I think that's where the libertarian movement has picked up so much steam, and perhaps rightfully so. But we can't do any of those things in a vacuum. We can't just pick and choose who we agree with the most. And unfortunately today, what you see of the most liberal movement of America is that they are picking and choosing. They are saying, because we offend by having these certain policies, we're going to impose certain restrictions on those of you who don't agree with us. And the whole framework of the Constitution, the whole idea of liberty, as it relates to the civil government, and I hope we get into some of the other forms of government that aren't as quite apparent, was to protect those with minority views. It was not to support the majority view. It was to protect those with the minority view from a government or even a people who could push their will on those with the minority view.
such as the Pilgrims.
Such as the Pilgrims. It's exactly what they had come from.
Yep.
That's right.
You have a fascinating diagram in the book basically showing the flow of power and resources in 1776 versus 2013. Would you discuss that a little bit?
Sure. So I like to think of the framework of liberty along kind of both vertical and horizontal lines. And, in our social study classes in 5th grade, we learn about the balance of power is checked between the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. And that's very important. Mm-hmm. It was wise of our founders to do that, to separate powers and to make them competing specifically inside the federal government. And many of the states' governments have replicated that same system. But there's more important continuums of power restriction. The one you're referring to, Al, in the book is one where we talk about how the Constitution was specifically limiting of the federal government's power, specifically through the 10th Amendment, and that in essence, power was created to start from the bottom and move up. So the example I like to use, because I like to be silly on purpose, is if you live in a city that doesn't like garbage cans being on the front lawn for more than 24 hours, we can debate the merits of that good or bad policy. But it is certainly something that city perhaps has the right to say that collection of that community has gotten together and said, we don't like garbage cans and we want them behind the house. I don't have a constitutional right to live in that city. So if I don't like the policy, what do? I get up and I walk away. I move to a city with less restrictive laws. Now, if the federal government were to do that, it would be a clear intrusion on a constitution that was limiting its right to go to that level of governance. So in the old days, in 1776, the idea was that the federal government had very specific powers, as it says in the Constitution itself. And that power actually flowed from the bottom up to the federal government, as long as with the resources. The 16th Amendment, the states were actually taxed based on their population. Taxes weren't applied to you and I individually. They were taxed, the state was taxed to carry their role. Today, though, if you look at it, and I could give you stories of this, I mean, all through government. I started my time in government as a city council member. How many times we had the debate of the state cutting certain funds of the cities because we Ohioans, I'm from Ohio, would send money to Columbus only to have it chopped up in a bunch of pieces and sent back to the cities, only for the cities to go back every 2 years to Columbus and beg to keep it. And we do that at the federal level all the time as well. The majority of the power is at the federal level and it trickles down, and the power trickles down instead of trickling up, as it should have.
And the thing about the money at the federal level is the federal government will use extortion.
Absolutely.
To either withhold funds or to give out funds. For example, if you don't have helmet laws for motorcycles, I mean, I'm picking a hypothetical, but if the federal government wants a federal law requiring motorcycle helmets and the state of Iowa doesn't want that law, well, the federal government will use extortion to compel Iowa to do that.
Well, I served some time in the Ohio State Legislature, and the two biggest general fund expenses are Medicaid and education. And many could argue that those are appropriate, good uses, but both of them are heavily tied to federal funding. And so anytime you started to have a serious conversation about reforming the two most expensive line items for the people of Ohio, and I'm sure probably the people of Kentucky as well, reforming those two things, the first conversation that you always got into was, what's the federal government standard? Because no one wanted to take on the federal government standard, or they might lose the funding related to it. And so your example is not just an example in a vacuum. It's not just a conspiracy theory of the right. This is happening every day in our state legislatures across the 50 states, and it's limiting creativity as these states look to deal with what is a very difficult budget environment today. Regardless of your view, regardless of you're liberal and say, hey, you know, I want more Medicaid and more education spending, or you're a conservative and say, cut it, we are suffering under those policies today.
Okay.
Because our hands are tied, because we want the federal government to continue giving what they promised to give. That's what you're saying?
Yes, I mean, that's the functional outcome. But it's really all a question of, how did we miss the framework of liberty from the very beginning? So I'm not going to recast history of education and how the federal government got involved in it, because I'm not prepared to do that. I feel confident in saying that it was a conversation, just as it is often today, about the good outcome that would come of federal government's involvement. So how many times do you hear the debate in the national elections about how Republicans and Democrats alike step up and say they want to increase the spending on education? Why? Because they want to be perceived by the public as caring deeply about our kids. Right. The best thing you could do for America's kids is get the federal government out of the education business, return that money to the states, and let the state legislatures actually debate solutions to the problems they're facing in all 50 states.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever see a point in time where we might be able to reverse this flow of power and resources?
Al, I do, and I'm not saying that just as, matter of fact, I'm naturally a pessimist. I think we're in a very difficult position, but we can't live, I think what many of us see and many of us don't want to see, and so we spend more time watching American Idol. And that wasn't a shot. That wasn't a shot at American Idol. It's just my analogy. We can't remain on this path. This path is an unsustainable path. We are either going to walk directly into a socialistic environment, and I'm not calling President Obama a socialist, although he reflects those policies. But we're either going to continue to do civil government to solve our problem, and we're going to find ourselves enslaved, or we're going to move backwards. We cannot just remain in limbo any longer. I think we have crossed that line.
So what would you say to a conservative who might be watching this? What would you say to them? What should they do?
Well, I'd say first, keep up the good fight. But second, start to think more deeply and carefully and critically about why you hold the positions you hold. We are not pro-business because we are pro-job creation. We're pro-business because we believe Americans should have the right to engage in capitalistic work and profit from it. We're not pro-school choice because we don't like teacher unions. We're pro-school choice because we believe parents are the best people to decide on behalf of their children where those kids should go to school. We're not pro-more energy because we want lower gas prices. We're pro-more energy because those are resources that we believe God put in the ground or under the ocean that the American people have a right to benefit from. So I just threw out 3 quick examples. We are what we are if we critically think about it because we are in an effort to preserve liberty. And that's a preservation of liberty for people who call themselves Democrats and liberals, people who don't agree with me on their choice of lifestyle behavior. It's a preservation of liberty for all of us. It's not a preservation of liberty just for the few of us who happen to agree.
You have a statement in here, liberty needs morality and morality needs liberty. Want to expand on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So this is, I was raised in a home where I like to joke and say, pretty much my dad he's retired Air Force. I'm proud of his service. But pretty much if Dr. Dobson, if you know that name, or Ronald Reagan or Jesus Christ didn't talk about it, it probably just wasn't necessary to be talked about. So I was raised in a home where as I got into the political scene, I joined the movement for the pro-life movement, the pro-family movement, the social conservative, as we call it today, movement. And I'm still very socially conservative. I believe in life at conception. I believe in defending the natural definition of marriage. But the social conservative movement in many respects has kind of bought in, and rightfully so, to say if you want to preserve liberty, morality must thrive. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely true. You cannot separate them. But I think what the social conservative movement sometimes has failed to do is to say, but the exact opposite's true as well. If you have a government who is enforcing morality on its people and restricting liberty, you're going to have a government who corrupts. Again, look at the bedtime story, the historical facts of where many of our founders came from in escaping England. What were they escaping from? They were escaping from a church that frankly had a pretty high moral standard, that had joined with the civil government, and through its joining had corrupted both of them because they don't belong together. One had infused on the other, and the church was using the government to enforce its will, and the government was using the church to enforce its will. So you show me a country that is not moral, and I will show you a country that is slipping into tyranny or slavery. But on the flip side, you show me a country that is not free, and I will show you a country that ultimately is losing its morality.
I think Iran might be a good example of that.
Absolutely. You can force a moral code, but without freedom, you have really no true morality at all, because especially we who are of the Christian faith believe that morality is something that outflows from our heart. Our heart is something that you can't legislate. I can make you convert by putting a sword to your mouth. Constantine tried that, but I can't change who you are. That is something that happens through a pursuit of truth, and that's why our founders said, let the church be the church. And by church, I mean broadly defined. Let those who are seeking the higher calling of dealing with the afterlife, which we all do in one way or the other, let them deal with it without civil government involvement.
Gwen?
I agree with that. If you don't have morality as your fiber, you were talking about the framework, that would be the framework, is that morality. If you don't have that morality, how are you going to keep freedom? Because when you think you have the power, the tendency is to squelch the other person.
Well, and that's why the civil government, I've been accused before by a particular Democrat chairman, actually, who was trying to make sure I didn't win an election. I did. He came out and said, Seth doesn't believe in any government at all. That couldn't be further from the truth, because civil government's necessary to actually protect those who would seek to infuse their will on someone else. That when you hear the phrase rule of law, that's exactly what our founders were looking to institute. So it wasn't this type of laissez-faire, do whatever you want, any church can survive. If you've got a church doctrine that says go out and kill all the infidels, then that's not going to fly in America, because in America we have said collectively together through the rule of law that we respect life. We respect life, and we're going to protect life from a civil government perspective. And that, by the way, Al and Gwen, is both biblical and reflected in our founding documents. Romans clearly talks about that the sword of justice was given to the government to execute. What Romans doesn't say is, and oh, by the way, it was designed to make sure everybody's a Christian. Not anywhere close to it. That's not where it's appropriately applied.
And you're right about respecting life. If you start to decide which is life and which is not, what to respect as life and what you don't respect as life, then everything is open and you're going to start down that slippery slide. So I think I agree with what you're saying. We need to be pro-life, because when we start taking and chipping away at that truth, we are chipping away and hurting ourselves. And conservatives, I think, are slipping away. You were saying we've gone astray. We've lost that for that fiber of morality of what is life.
Well, and what's very scary is that, Gwen, if the real debate around the life question is, when does life begin? That's the debate. And conservatives often have gotten into this incrementalism, and look, politics is the art of compromise. I lived it, I know that, but we can't ever lose sight of what the end goal is. And your point is very accurate, whether it's life or education or anything else. We start to erode those foundations of liberty. Liberty in part being held up by this rule of law, a statement that we support life we have bound ourselves together through this Constitution that says we respect life. Then there's really no end to that potential slippery slope. And that's why we're seeing this march toward euthanasia. Our old people are not near as safe as they used to be, because, hey, if you're not helping society, what usefulness is there? That's the direction we seem to be headed.
You have an interesting quote in here from George Washington's farewell address in 1796, and I quote, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens." Yeah,
again, I may get in a little trouble here, but I've been in trouble all my life. So You know, it is easy to take quotes from guys like George Washington, God rest his soul, and apply them and say, look, America was Christian. And I would argue very much that America was founded on very Judeo-Christian principles that they saw clearly, both through their reflection in natural law, both through their individual Christian faith, which many of them were, and through their understanding of history. I mean, remember, they had just watched what France had gone through with a popular democracy that had used its power to kill the rich, because how many rich were there? Well, not as many as poor, so they just lined them up at the guillotine. I think what George Washington was saying, and what so many of our founders have said, we have to be careful not to just apply this blanket and say, well, if everybody would see the world the way I do religiously, there wouldn't be a problem. That might be true, but it's not reality. Mm-hmm. But what Washington was saying, and so many other of our founders were saying, is if you have a leadership that is void of an understanding and a pursuit of higher truth, then you have no leadership at all. It's not patriotic at all to say, oh, I don't care about God, I just am pro-American. It's only patriotic if you are understanding that America is, in its very definition, by the way our founders viewed it, was defined by civil government being pitted against church government, being pitted against family government, being pitted against personal government, that all of these were interlinked in an intricate effort to restrict each other's power, to play in the space that God had given them and that our civil government then reflected, and to ensure that through that, none of those governments, none, noticed I said, not just the civil government, but even church government that they had come from, could be used to restrict the God-given liberty that they knew was in each man's soul.
Well, just as each individual needs an accountability partner or a family or something just to keep you on track, so does the government.
Good analogy, yeah.
Right? We need to be held accountable,
That's right.
or else we will go astray and we'll take advantage of that, because that's just our human nature.
That's right. That's right.
You also have a distinguish in your book between freedom of worship and the freedom of religion. You want to expand on that?
Yeah, so I think your quote from George Washington was very apropos. Our founders did not say, hey, get rid of religion, which many in the ACLU and others would like to force upon us today. Instead, they said there's freedom of worship, there's freedom of religion. Obama, I get a kick out of, it's not just Obama, it's some of the Republican candidates as well. They talk in terms of, oh, that's my personal faith, that's off limits. It may be my conviction to go to a particular church on Sunday morning, but it really has no bearing on what I would do. Well, that's hogwash, and that's exactly what I think Washington was talking about. That's no patriot at all. Religion truly defined, whether you're Baptist or Methodist or even Muslim, let's just be honest, changes the way a person relates to their neighbor, to their life, to everything around them that true religion does. It creates changes. Now, some of that's forced. Some of that, I believe, for me as a born-again believer, is a heart condition. You couldn't take from me if you wanted to. But those things don't just happen on Sunday morning. This concept that we can just regulate religion to Saturday or Sunday, that you're free to do that Sunday, but when you come into work Monday, the Obamacare mandate for contraceptive drugs shouldn't apply because religion's Sunday and Obamacare mandates are Monday. No. That's an improper understanding of again the balance of power, not just our freedom is expressed through our religion, but also the balance of power that was expected to exist. So
that's the exact quandary that the Roman Catholic Church is in.
Sure. And in many respects, and now I'm going to pick on the Roman Catholic Church, but I could say this about several mainstream Protestant religions as well. In many respects, they have lazily viewed the civil government as their partner in what has always been defined as the church's role and responsibility, and that has now completely backfired on them.
Yep. When?
That makes me think of Jeremiah 17, where it talks about, cursed is the man who puts his trust in mankind and makes flesh his strength. And we forget, verse 9 of that chapter saying that the heart is deceitful above all else and is desperately sick. And I wave that white flag all the time. I say, I admit that if you were to push and shove me into a corner, I could be pretty evil. So
I wouldn't believe it, Glenn. I
need the checks and balances.
Would you believe it, Al? I don't mean to put you on
Yes,
the spot.
I believe it.
I need the checks and and balances. I mean, really, if I were given, like we were talking earlier, if you were to give me the right to be king of the day, who knows what I might come up with if I didn't have some people there to, bounce off some of the ideas. I mean, the heart is wicked, and I admitted that way back when I was 20. I was suicidal. I had had an abortion as a 16-year-old, and I knew it was wrong, and yet I didn't know what to do about it. I felt constrained. I didn't have the strength, the courage to do otherwise, and I really did think my life doesn't matter anymore, because if you see yourself as a walking, talking coffin, really, what does your life mean to you? So by taking the life away of a smaller one, I also reduced my value of my life. And thank God he came to me, giving me forgiveness through Jesus Christ. And I decided that's the end of that road of destruction of trying to end my life. I'm not going to live and promote what you're talking about, liberty, even for the smallest that doesn't have a voice. But I've seen the potential of my evil heart. You can be either a coward and let evil people take their agenda to whatever, or you could be real powerful and then squelch those who don't have a voice.
Right.
So we do need each other, and we need that mutual respect. So I'm all for the checks and balances in government. And right now, I don't see that happening.
You have an interesting quote here from Jesus when he called on people to turn the other cheek. He was not there to overthrow the Roman government. Instead, he was establishing a new way, one that would reign in people's hearts.
Yeah, that section of my quoting Jesus was one where I tried to distinguish between what I've seen from some mainline Protestant churches, including the Catholic Church, depending on where you would define them to be. This concept of who would Jesus bomb, that was very popular in the Gulf War, or that Jesus would use the government to do social programming and hand out goodies. His comments of turning the other cheek and of giving another, walking an extra mile and giving the cloak and not just the shirt off your back was really a command. And I'm not trying to bifurcate his words. I mean, you go back into the Old Testament, God worked with swift justice in many respects, and that took life often. Jesus was really setting up a new way. I mean, he wasn't here to institute civil government rules for civil government leaders of the time. Matter of fact, his disciple Peter and many of his disciples thought that's what was going to happen. That's why the people came out and put down palm branches and declared him king, and 3 days later were yelling to crucify him because they expected an earthly kingdom to be restored. They expected him to give them freedom from the Romans, and instead, the whole time, if you go back and, of course, looking on this side of redemptive history, back through that lens and seeing the beauty of what he was saying was he was here to set people's hearts at freedom.
That's
that
right.
Regardless of what civil government did, that there was a way where, as you just shared your testimony, I appreciate that, Gwen, you could see liberty through the lens of the redemptive work of Jesus Christ. And so to try to apply his turn the other cheek mentality to what America should be doing with the Russia today, or what America should be doing in its welfare programs and policy, is a misapplication of what Jesus was actually commanding his followers to do, which today should be the equivalent to the church. So you want to apply that? Get the church engaged. Should the church be bombing anybody? Absolutely not. It should be caring for the poor, the sick, and the needy. It should be sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. It should be caring for the wounded in spirit and in heart. And leave it to the civil government, as Romans talked about, to apply the sword of justice, both nationally and even internally, to maintain that rule of law.
I would agree. And that would be that kind of work would be the fruit of our redemption, so to speak.
Yes.
If you wish to donate or to sponsor the Watchman Report, you can mail a donation to 407 Elm Avenue, the Watchman Report LLC, Terrace Park, Ohio, 45174. You can also watch past Watchman Report programs on YouTube by searching the Watchman Report with Alan Singler, or if you wanted to watch this particular program, you could search it by saying with Seth Morgan. There seems to be a tremendous appeal to people for collectivism.
Always.
Yep.
Always has been.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think it's where the book starts, is the concept of collectivism always feels better. And, there's really two ways to collectively work together. One is in a volunteer way, and one is in an involuntary way. I purchase life insurance because I fear that my unfortunate early departure would leave my 3 children and wife in a difficult position. And so I pool risk. I choose to give money to somebody, and they choose to give me back a promise of a certain amount of dollars. I'm not going to say what that is, or I'm afraid somebody here might find a way to take me out. That's a national secret. Yeah. So I collectivize, I collectivism in the way I handle life. We do it with our car insurance. We do it all the time. We even do it in the way that we view often our church work together. So perhaps we join to a body of like-minded people who is doing a work. We throw money in the plate. Part of that money goes to paying for the preacher we're hearing, the orchestration of the church itself, in many ways, hopefully, to some into the benevolent area as well, whether it's foreign missions or local missions. So we collectively do things together all of the time, and there's no shame in that. But when I am told that I must give in order to collectively work together, it inherently typically sets up a perverse incentive. And that's exactly what our founders saw when they came. I mean, some of the very first colonies were collectively oriented. They said they were in a new world. I think many of us would make the same mistake. They said, look, there's Indians out there who may like to kill us. We don't understand the land. We don't understand how to plant crops and make it work. And so they got together and said, let's just throw it all together, and we'll just take from it what we need. And what the early governors of those colonies found out was that people didn't work as hard as they should.
Right.
They were dying of disease because their industriousness had gone down. It was horrific. And finally, I believe it was Governor Smith backed up and said, you know what, you're going to eat what you grow. And overnight, almost, sensationally, this idea of being able to profit from one's own work took flight, and it led to, frankly, the very first Thanksgiving. So we're seeing collectivism. It is always alluring because on paper it always seems to make the most sense. I like to joke and say today it's pretty obvious, but if you go back to the beginnings of Obamacare, here the Republican Party had not dealt well with the health insurance crisis, and they still haven't dealt well with the problem. So what comes is an opportunity, a crisis, as Rahm Emanuel liked to talk about, a crisis that didn't need to go unused, and they impose Obamacare on the American people. At the time, if you did not understand the inherent problem with Obamacare, that it was forced collectivism, that there was a perverse incentive, at that time it looked good on paper. Collectivism always looks good on paper. And once again, it's one of those situations where if we take the bait of always arguing the policy just around the outcome of the policy, we lose the debate long term. Because what was really at stake in that debate was individual liberty. Is this a place civil government belongs? And the answer was clearly no. But the American people were so excited about fixing a problem, the outcome, that they fell into the trap.
Under the category of majority rule is not always right rule, you have some interesting observations. Too often their excuse is the will of the people, yet it was majority rule that allowed slavery in the United States. It was majority rule that killed so many people in France during the Revolution. And it has been majority rule that has often crippled societies as the majority sought to reap for itself what others had sown. It's not the majority rule that rules us, nor should it be.
Another common, I think, misplaced excitement, especially among our friends sometimes in what's called the Tea Party movement, where the concept is, look, if government's so bad, let's just make it about us. And as you said, Gwen, so aptly earlier, the heart's desperately wicked, and it can deceive. And so just the three of us getting together and deciding what we're eating tonight, because two of us outvote the other one, means that one of us is going to have to eat our peas and not like it. And that concept is frankly scary when you think about its application across the board. Slavery was legal because it was the majority rule. That's really what people wanted at the time until things started to change. I've often been asked as a legislator, and sometimes I get in trouble, I'll hear people say, look, you work for me, you're a legislator, I'm no longer a legislator, but you work for me, and so therefore, I've literally had people scream into the phone this, you need to do what I say. Well, that's really nice. I guess I need to go poll my entire district, and if 51% of 111,000 people at the time said X, I should be for X. That is not at all what our founders saw. They saw a republic that was democratically elected, that At periodic times, the people had the right to step back in through their vote and say, this person represents me or does not represent me. It's the reason today that we are void of leadership, because we have a bunch of politicians running around trying to please people to keep in power instead of using what they have been given to lead a country that is that is desperately seeking solutions to the problems they face.
Well, you just said the critical two words that we don't hear too often anymore. We hear democracy, 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 and yet we live in a constitutional republic.
That's right.
Another good quote you have in here is from...
Man, I was full of them.
Yeah.
Who wrote this?
Some guy named Seth Morgan. Up-and-coming guy. Anyway, it's from our buddy James Madison again.
Yes.
If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary.
Yeah, so I think Madison so aptly put what I've tried to put in 142 pages, the idea that if really, I mean, if men were angels, there'd be no need for government. That idea of perfect morality would lead to the no need for, we would all just get along, like Rodney King said. We would be able to live in a socialistic utopia. We would be able to always share with each other, but men aren't angels. And his second point was the government. If the government were full of angels, we wouldn't be afraid of them.
That's right.
But the fact is, neither are true.
Now, what's interesting is how Jesus was questioned about government and I have that here, Matthew 22, and he says this to them, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites?" So he knew behind their real reason for questioning him about government. And that was, who do we pay tax to? Should we pay tax? And Jesus said, well, show me the coin. And on the coin, he says, well, whose likeness and inscription is this? Then renders to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. And what you were mentioning earlier, the Jews were disappointed. They wanted Jesus to be king.
Yes.
And yet here Jesus is saying, I'm not trying to abolish the government here. What was he trying to do, do you think, in saying that statement, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's? And why haven't we maybe been following that? And maybe have we misjudged our Caesar?
Well, I think you're right that they were looking for a king, as all of us are constantly doing, and because it's the easy way out, we think. I think in that particular passage, he was using this as a way to just push back on him and kind of get him out of his hair and prove their hypocrisy. But your point is also valid. He was basically making the statement that I'm not here again to set up some sort of earthly kingdom. But Caesar's money, so give it back to him. But give to God the things that are God's.
Right.
And in many respects, I think we're being forced to give to Caesar all the time. Mm-hmm. We're failing in our devotion to God, I think, in many respects. And by that, what do I mean? Is it that you look like me, you don't look like me, go to my church on Sunday? No, but it is in that understanding that Caesar is not the author of liberty. Caesar is not the author of our happiness. Caesar cannot solve the problems we have. What we need to give to God is our pursuit of him and that pursuit of truth leading to those things that can provide the happiness, solve the problems we have, etc.
And show
we have
our
put way
heart.
too much confidence
And the
in
heart
Caesar.
of the other.
Yes.
And that was the problem with this collectivity idea is we're kind of forgetting, wait a minute, your heart and my heart, I don't think this is going to work.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Al, you've run out of good quotes?
No, I'm leafing through here. I'll find something. You say here, America is failing its children by having taken educational responsibility away from parents and given it to government.
Yeah, that's close to home for me. So I was, well, I won't tell the long story for the sake of time. Let's just say that, I believe that parents are the first defense for their children always. And there are children out there who, they don't get to pick their parents. And I think even our founders viewed education policy as something valuable that civil government should be involved in the provision of it. Now, by the way, that would happen at the state or the local level, not at the federal level. That's why it's not in the Constitution. But
So here's a case where we're giving maybe too much to Caesar again.
absolutely, but I want to be clear that there are kids who have bummer parents, bummer families, and I'm not saying that we should just set them out to the wind. I think it was the old Deluder Satan Act. It was funny what they called it. It was, I think, 1631, if I have my history correct, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where they first said, no, we're going to set aside time, and parents, your kids are going to be there, because the best defense to liberty is a informed populace. Now, the problem today is we've got this liberal agenda being pushed down through our schools. Why? Because we have too much federal and government control over the process. But we now, Al, back to your question, have turned we through our laziness as an American people, not giving to God what's God's, and instead giving to Caesar what's not his, we have started to view education as government's responsibility. And through that process, we've got a bunch of kids who not only don't know their 3 R's, but are struggling with the meaning of life, because the family and church and personal governance are not as prominent in their role as they should be, because we've backfilled it with civil government.
You mentioned briefly a president that I somewhat dislike, Lyndon Johnson.
Just somewhat?
We
Wow.
we spent $15 trillion combating poverty, and yet the rate of poverty has increased.
Well, this is a difficult, in the book, I think you're quoting from a chapter on welfare, and it's difficult, especially for conservatives who are always viewed as the people who are, anti-poor or this or that. The fact is that collectivism, even in the area of trying to pull people up, has not really worked, because government's just incapable. It is institutionally incapable of changing hearts. It's institutionally incapable of changing minds. President Bush, I thought, had a great idea of working through faith-based initiatives to try to make that happen, but has it happened? No, it hasn't happened, because it's still government run and controlled. So even the faith-based initiatives get clogged in this cycle. It was really intended to work where, think about it, our poor and our needy around us. Imagine if individuals were walking alongside in that very mentoring role and making the subjective choice of saying, look, this man or woman is not doing what they should be doing, and therefore we're gonna cut them off to get their attention, to bring them back into the fold. A community approach to this would be so much better than the Lyndon B. Johnson effort. God rest his soul again, and I'm not, this war on poverty. So again, we made a choice around the expected outcome instead of making a choice around the framework of liberty that would have led to it.
And if we're always pushing it over to the government, that makes us then less responsible,
That's right. Absolutely.
It's the government's job to do this.
Right.
And then we're not examining our own self, saying, okay, what can I do personally?
Right.
So it's just a way, it's typical of the heart to say, it's not really my responsibility.
Right.
You say here there are 2 types of people in poverty, and I don't think we think about this very often. People who cannot wait to get out of poverty, and people who are comfortable in their poverty.
Yeah.
And the example you used was a man who sort of stepped away from the world because he wanted to be involved in his spiritual life.
Yeah, well, there's 2 types of people who are comfortable in their poverty too. So perhaps that makes 3, but there's those who choose to not pursue wealth the way most Americans do, and sometimes that leads to poverty.
Right.
And why would we bail those people? Why would we force them out of that? Why would we impose against our will and say, oh no, driving a Mercedes is a lot better than driving a bicycle. Why don't you go drive, why would we do that? The second type of people comfortable in their poverty are those who have learned to work the system.
Right.
And neither of them, in my mind, are legitimate cases to help. Now, there are those who can't wait to get out, and I have no problem with assisting those people, but you have to ask the question, where's the right framework to do that? It's not through throwing another food stamp card at them. It's through walking alongside. The fact is, those who can't wait to get out of poverty generally are getting out of poverty.
Okay. Here's a $64,000 question. Do you see a leader on the horizon who will instill these values of liberty?
I don't have a crystal ball, Al, and I've not been given insight into future things like that. So I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. I think there are leaders. I think President Obama, unfortunately, has been a train wreck for liberty. I think he views civil government in a way that most Americans even don't view it, perhaps even some in his own party.
And that's sad, because the he's a constitutional scholar, supposedly.
Right. Well, what's I think sadder, though, is that even those who have come before him, I look back to President George W. Bush, who I have a lot of tremendous personal respect for. And I can remember the day where I viewed No Child Left Behind as a positive policy. Why? Because if we're going to spend money on education, why not force return on it? Why not force accountability? Well, it's failed. Why has it failed? Because it was out of context with the framework of liberty. So my answer to you is, who on the horizon? Well, right now, I'm looking for a little pain relief from President Obama. I won't lie about that. But here's what to look for, I think, when we think about who is that next leader, if there is one. Number one, Caesar is not going to take care of our problem. So you can put Ted Cruz or Ben Carson or Rand Paul or whoever you want in. That's not going to magically solve the problem. If the church and the family and personal governance does not rise up to meet the occasion, you can stick whatever leader you want in there. And at best, you're going to be dealing with 4 nice years. And then the next bad guy is going to come in. So are there leaders who may understand this better than others? You bet. Does our current president understand it? I don't think he does at all. Matter of fact, I think he's on a race to destroy it. So removing him from office would be great, but it is not the end-all be-all solution, like I fear many of our conservatives are looking for. My wife, very briefly, always reminds me, and she is so right, of the story from 1 Samuel, where the people of Israel are dealing directly with Jehovah, with God Almighty, and instead they come to Samuel and say, give me a king. And Samuel goes to God and says, they've rejected me as your servant. And God says, no, they didn't reject you. They rejected me as their leader. And he says to them, look, tell them they'll get their king, but they're going to give their people to be warriors. Their boys are going to be enslaved in the army. The daughters are going to be confectionaries. They're going to be forced to give of their land and of their flocks and of their cattle. And all of those things came true. So the people got their king. They gave to Caesar what was never Caesar's, but the ultimate outcome of that was enslavement like they had never seen before. If we just think that electing the next conservative guy is going to solve the problem, we've missed the solution altogether.
I agree.
So what I'm hearing you say is, we as Americans shouldn't be looking to that particular man to solve our problem, but we should be looking to God and looking to God and saying, what can I do personally for your glory, to honor you, to make this a better country?
That's where it starts. But I want to get practical because I'm often accused of not being practical. So what do we look for in the political spectrum? Because this is a relatively political book, but it's more about our life choices. What do we look for politically? We look for someone who understands that his or her election is not the saving grace. That you could make me keen for a day and I think I would do good things. But if I can't recognize that me being keen would be part of the problem, then I'm not fit for office. Does that make sense?
Right.
And that's what we tend to miss often as conservatives. I get calls all the time, hey, what do you think about so-and-so? And I want to scream back into the phone, what do you think about liberty? Why are we discussing the next personality on the table who is bound and determined to fail us? And even if he doesn't, it's going to be 4 to 8 years at best, and then we're back in the same situation.
So again, you're saying it's about liberty, stupid. We need to look at ourselves and say, okay, stupid, wake up.
Are we being stupid? I'm not saying we're being stupid, but are we being stupid?
What are you doing? You, all by yourself. Are you impacting your family? Are you impacting your church? Are you taking a stand? And that's probably what you're basically saying. Wake up.
In summary, would something you'd like to summarize?
Just appreciate the opportunity, Al and Gwen. Thank you very much.
I hope you come back.
Well, I'm sure that we can arrange that. I hope your viewers enjoyed this, and I would ask them, obviously, feel free to pick up a copy of the book. You can go to sethmorgan.co, and I'll get a signed copy out to you. It's also out there on Amazon and the like. Just to think clearly about these issues. I really think, I think many people hear the title and they think, oh, one more book about liberty, one more Tea Party type book, and that's really not what this is. I really don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're liberal. You don't even have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with the policies. But I think all of us are intent, the vast majority, 80-90% of us really deeply care about maintaining our personal liberty. To do that, you have to care about maintaining a framework of liberty, and to do that, you have to understand the framework of it itself.
Yeah, I just wanted to let the audience know, when I read this book, I did not view it as a Tea Party book or a Republican book or a Democratic book. It's a book about liberty. Until our next program, may Yahweh bless you and protect you. May Yahweh shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May Yahweh lift up his face unto you and give you peace in the name of the Prince of Peace, Yeshua HaMashiach. And hopefully we'll see you next month, God willing.